known as the movie capital of the world, bringing films to audiences that provide entertainment and at times thought-provoking drama, Hollywood recently hosted a different kind of media through a unique forum broadcast live worldwide on Supreme Master Television on Saturday, July 26, 2008. The Climate Change International Conference was held at the Pacific Design Center in West Hollywood, California, USA. Organized by the Supreme Master Ching Hai International Association, it was a conference that brought together green Hollywood celebrities and notable speakers. Co-hosted by Emmy Award-winning television journalist and vegan Jane Velez Mitchell, the event was informative and the subject matter highly relevant. 3 panels were conducted, each with a different theme: the urgent scientific facts of the climate crisis, its spiritual perspectives, and the transformational role of the media. Invited as a special guest speaker, Supreme Master Ching Hai graciously attended via live video conference to answer questions from the panelists as well as the audience. We now invite you to join us for the rebroadcast of the Climate Change International Conference.
In the World Peace Diet, one of the things that early on in the book I talk about is that the last revolution that this culture ever experienced was about between 8 and 10,000 years ago, and I call it the herding revolution, where we basically, actually started in the country that is now Iraq, started to own animals. The first time people started owning animals, seeing them merely as property. That was the fundamental reduction, and with that came everything else. We started owning human beings, slavery happened, we started having this rich elite that emerged, and they owned the capital. Capital means head, as in head of livestock. So the first capitalism was 10,000 years ago with this wealthy elite that emerged that owned the capital. They wanted more land. They wanted more capital. The fastest way to get rich quick back then was to steal, was actually to go to war and fight against other capitalists to steal their livestock or to win their livestock by defeating them in battle. The very first word for war in this planet that we know of is the old Sanskrit word gavya, which means simply the desire for more cattle. That was the first word for war, and people who lost, basically their livestock became the property of the ones who won, and the men became slaves, the women became concubines. And it was really a brutal time, and it brought out the worst in people. The men had to become hard and tough and brutal and disconnected from their feelings. Women became reduced to mere property that were bought and sold like chattel property. If you look at the very first writings that we have, the ancient Epic of Gilgamesh, the old Sumerian writings, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Old Testament writings, the first ones, you see by the time the historic period emerged 3,000 years ago, the whole thing is established. There's slavery, and there's women are property, and wildlife has also been reduced to being the status of mere pests. You know, they maybe will interfere with our livestock, so we want to get rid of them. And whoever owned the most capital, the most sheep and goats and cows, they were the ones who controlled society. They controlled all the institutions. They controlled religion and education. And is it any different today? I mean, why is it that it is still today that making war is the most profitable thing for the wealthy elite? Because we're still eating the same food. At the end of the day, we go home and we eat the flesh of animals that have been brutalized, and we eat the secretions of the same animals that have been brutalized. And so we keep the same institutions in place, and that's the reason we've had so much trouble making any significant progress in this world, and all these efforts for justice and sustainability, because we're still eating the same food. We're still fundamentally reinforcing within ourselves the idea that might makes right, the idea that we can exclude other living beings from the sphere of our compassion, and the idea that war is a good way to make money. And this is underlying this culture. This is the living fury at the core of our culture that no one can look at. It's taboo to talk about this. So once we start to see it, then we get the understanding of the big picture of our culture. Then we realize why veganism is so essential, why it's the most powerful thing anyone can do to bless our world, and why, I mean, there's nothing more benevolent and more sacred and noble, I think, that anyone can do than to take on the task of spreading this message of veganism. Because at the very core of veganism, the other thing is the domination of the feminine. These animals that are most brutalized in this whole system are female animals. On dairy farms, on factory farms for pigs, chickens, cows, fish, all of this stuff, basically it's the female animals and the female reproductive cycles that are mercilessly dominated. And so we would never be able to do this to these females if we hadn't disconnected from our own innate wisdom and sensitivity that naturally knows that the most sacred parts of our lives, the most sacred things in nature are mothers giving birth to babies, caring for those babies, nursing those babies, nesting. This is something we should have a sense of honor and respect for. And yet dairy farms and all these places, the females are confined, their babies are stolen, we take away their products. And so it not only does it harm them, but it harms us. The ancient spiritual teachings of all the traditions emphasize when you harm someone else, you harm yourself more than you harm them. That whatever we would want most for ourselves, we should give to others. So if I want freedom and peace and joy and love for myself, I'm called to give that to others. If I give to others misery and enslavement and domination, then we end up being dominated. That's why we find more and more our culture, we are becoming enslaved, is because we are enslaving others. If we want to be free, we have to free others. And this is the teaching of liberation that I think we all know at the core of our being. I remember growing up in Concord, Massachusetts, and I just ate the food, massive amounts of meat, dairy, and eggs. And I remember when I was about 8 years old, I said to my mother, "So, is this what everybody eats?" And she said, "Yeah, this is what everybody eats." And then she said, "Well, there are vegetarians." And she said it like, "But don't worry, you'll never meet one. They live on another planet. They're like far away, and don't worry." And I remember I grew up, and when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I went to this dairy farm. I went away to a summer camp in Vermont, and it was affiliated with a dairy farm that was organic, and this was like in the mid-60s, I guess, or something. And it was so interesting because this is the kind of place you think that nothing but good can come from, right? A Vermont organic dairy farm. And I remember we went down and we were all taught to catch our own chicken and to put the chicken down on this board on the ground and then to put her head between the two nails, and then in your other hand you had your axe and you just cut her head off and she'd run around spouting blood, and then when she expired, we would take her body and we'd put it through the hot water and we would eat the chicken. And I remember as a kid of maybe 12 or 13, I had no problem with that. I had been well indoctrinated. I had gone through 12 or 13 years of intense indoctrination 3 times a day, and I knew, as a matter of fact, that a chicken is just a chicken. It has no soul, and it was put here by God for us to use, and if I didn't eat this chicken or this meat, I would die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency. That would be it. I'd be dead. So you just have to do it. It's set up like that. And I remember